Hi everyone. Before we go into the guide for my league starter, I want to quickly go through a couple of points for both transparency and save you time if this type of build is not for you. The build I'm planning to league start is a champion lightning strike character, and it performs like a budget mini aura stacker. Now, to get decent damage on a very low budget, it does require a few temporary buffs that you need to try and keep up when mapping, and definitely need to keep up for bossing. If you're a brand new player in the game, I wouldn't recommend you follow this build, as if you struggle to understand the mechanics of the build, it won't do the damage that you need. If you're one of the people that followed this build last league, the build is very similar, it just pumps out a lot more damage. Now, Slayer looks super strong at endgame and is definitely the best duelist ascendancy, but I want a build that I know can clear the Atlas really cheaply, which is why I'm league starting this build, because I did the same last league and it's even stronger now. I do though, after 1 week, plan to switch ascendancies to Slayer to build a character that can then tackle all the toughest content in the game. So with that out of the way, let's jump into the guide. Hey all, and welcome back to Ascendancy Gaming and my league start build for 325, which is once again a Vile Lightning Strike champion. Now, this is a build I played last league and it cleared the Atlas on a shoestring. It was less than the divine investment. It scaled really well into endgame, completed T17s, wave 30 simulacrums and some very juiced mapping. Firstly, apologies for the poor quality of the footage. I had to rip this from my old YouTube videos from last league and it lost a lot of quality. The build is a super fun and quick melee character that essentially comes in two forms. A budget set up to clear your Atlas, farm tons of currency and get your first 2 void stones, and then a crit transition variant which then gives you 2 to 3 times more damage once you get some investment into the build. As mentioned, I comfortably completed most of the content in the game. The only thing I didn't try and tackle is uber bosses for 2 reasons. 1, I don't enjoy them at all. 2, I think that melee is still pretty unfriendly for these bosses. This build guide is going to cover all the important points, such as why champion, because it's dead, right? How much of a buff did the skill really receive? And then I'll go through the usual skills, items, leveling, Pantheons, and all importantly, how to play the build, as it is quite an active build when it comes to how we buff the damage on a budget. So let's jump right into things. So let's start with why champion, because it's a question I'm getting asked the most, as the Ascendancy did get some pretty heavy nerfs. It lost stun immunity, it lost 500 flat armor and evasion, lost 20% attack speed, banners have changed so that they don't work the same anymore, and it lost 5 fortification stacks. Also, with the nerfs to determination and grace, we don't know to what level armor and evasion we're going to be able to get really easy at league start, and if that's much lower, then the damage will be slightly less because of perseverance. The 3 parts that make this build tick still remain though. So we get permanent fortify still. Yes, it's dropped down to 15, but just having it permanently adds a lot to this build, because it means we also get permanent onslaught when running the perseverance belt, and that adds to the speed of the build. My one worry about melee is that even though it has received damage buffs, a lot of ways to get speed into builds has been nerfed. So even though we do get more damage on a league start setup, melee is still going to feel very slow and clunky, and I want to try and get around those aspects as much as I can. We get 30% increased aura effect, which buffs a lot of our damage. And we also get adrenaline, which is a massive buff. It's a bit fiddly to maintain as a champion, but once you get used to it, it becomes second nature. This is a buff that provides movement speed, attack speed, damage, and in this league, more importantly, damage reduction. We're also going to have a free ascendancy point to take. So this time we're going to be able to take the taunt ascendancy, which gives us 10% reduced damage taken. Now, Lightning Strike looks like it's been buffed pretty heavily. It was already a fairly decent skill anyway. Now, this skill will work with a lot of different setups and ascendancies. I'm not telling you to play this one because it's the best. I'm just doing it because I played it last league, I know it worked, and I really enjoyed it, but I'm sure there's stronger builds out there. My goal is to get the Atlas clear without having to worry about crafting or buying expensive rare items. Especially because I think this skill is going to see a lot of use this league. It could potentially be the most played skill in the league, which means gear is going to be expensive. I can achieve a very, very easy, simple setup with a few cheap uniques on champion to get my Atlas clear. That keeps it in budget, which allows me to then take stock after a few days of the league, check out all the new crafting and gear options, and then not feel bad about changing my build because I've already spent, 10 to 20 divines in it. I'll have spent realistically less than the divine on the build. So if there's much better ways to play it, that come out in the first few days of the league, I can easily transition to it without wasting any currency. So why are a lot of people potentially going to be playing Lightning Strike this league? There are a few reasons this gem has always been a decent or one of the more meta melee gems. It went through a period from around 315 to 318 or 319 where it was the most played melee skill, and a lot of people were using Lightning Strike on different ascendancies. So why are people going back to it now? Well, firstly, the base damage effectiveness has had a huge increase. It's gone from 225% to 456%. Essentially what this number means, for those that may not be that familiar with how skill gems work, is whatever damage you get from your skill and your gear will then get times by percentage of damage based on the effectiveness of the gem. So if, let's keep things simple, you had 1,000 base damage last league, you would then be doing 2,250 damage. However, this league, you'll now be doing 4,560. So it makes a massive difference. You're talking over 100% more damage. So effectively, double damage. There's lots of nerfs to take into account in terms of, you know, no totems and other things, but overall, you're still going to be doing a lot more damage than you were last league. Lightning Strike is also a lightning-based skill with a lightning tag, so it's pretty easy to get max shot with investment. This skill is one of the few skills that can hit with both the melee and projectile on the same target. Because of that, we can also make use of point blank to get even more damage on those projectiles because they're very close range. It comes with a vial version of the skill, which gives you 2 charges of an instant lightning strike that gets put on the enemy or on the ground, and then it just pulses a certain number of times. You can drop 2 of them. It adds a ton of single target burst damage. It can be played with Pierce for pretty decent clear, or it can be played using the Arc invariant to get lots more clear because you'll get lots of change from your projectiles. The reason I'm sticking with the normal version just for league start is purely for the single target damage. Normal Lightning Strike has quite a bit more base damage effectiveness than the Arc invariant, and single target is where Lightning Strike builds might struggle early on. So before we jump into the skills and the gear, there's a few very important aspects I need to go through to explain how this build works and how it gets its damage, because I doubt anyone else is building it the same way. And it also is very specific to this ascendancy and this setup. So you cannot put this gear on another ascendancy and get anywhere near the same performance. There are 3 main parts of our damage. The first is scaling aura effect, which is why we're going champion. So you will get, from this node here, 30% increase effect of non-curse auras. We're running 2 unique swords that also give us 10% increase effect of buffs. Then you pick a little bit up from the tree. The reason that's important is pretty much all of the damage in this build comes from a Wrath aura, a Smite aura, and then your adrenaline buff. So the 3 things you need to do when you're playing this build is you need to keep your adrenaline buff up, which we'll go through when we go through the skill gems. But essentially, this is a buff here that you get on champion for 20 seconds. And as you can see, it gives you increased damage, attack, movement speed, and physical damage reduction. You have to reapply this every 20 seconds. One important thing to note is you cannot reapply adrenaline if it's already going, and it drains our health when we do activate adrenaline. So if we activate adrenaline here, our health will go down and we have adrenaline, but if I try to do it again, I will just lose my health because adrenaline is off. It won't let you kill yourself. Like I can keep spamming adrenaline again and it's not going to work until I have enough health to do it. But just be aware, you can't activate this buff if it's already active, so we'll wait until it goes down. We can then use it again, and we get it for 20 seconds. Along with that, we're also using a Smite buff, so I'm going to have to quickly jump into a map to demonstrate this buff. Please be aware, this character setup at the moment has taken into account all of the nerfs, and it doesn't have all of the buffs that are coming its way, so you'll be doing about double damage that this character is doing, so please take this damage with a pinch of salt. But we'll jump into a map quickly, and I'll just demonstrate Smite. Now, the Smite part is not something you need to do on every map that you do. You shouldn't really need the extra damage to clear your maps, but it gives you a big boost on bosses. So activate adrenaline, and then we'll just run through and find some enemies on the map. All you need to do is hit the Smite button once, and you'll get this buff here for around 10 seconds. All you need to do is apply that on a boss, and the boss will be dead within 10 seconds. So it's not something you have to keep reapplying. It's just something you need to hit the boss once, and you'll have a big strike range. And then you've got your Smite buff, you'll have your adrenaline buff, and then you can also, as I say, use the Vial skill, which I'll just demonstrate quickly now. So I've now got 2 charges of Vial Lightning Strike, and then all you do is you just press the button twice, and then it will go through and just kill enemies for you. As I said, this is going to be weaker than what you'll have. We're about half damage of what we should be doing. This character doesn't really have any special gear on, but because we are able to get onslaught, we've got adrenaline, we can move through the map really, really quickly. You'll be moving like this when you hit red maps, because the gear will be about 50C. So it's nice and quick moving through. The clear, considering it'll be way better than this, will be absolutely ample. This is a out T16 map. I'll just bring the modifiers up just in case anyone's interested. I didn't check what they were, but the only other thing I'll quickly show off is the double hitting. We'll go into the boss and I'll just show where you need to position and what you need to look out for to know if you're double hitting. So we'll go into the boss here. I'll get rid of the map so you can actually see. We'll just clear out the mobs. And essentially what you need to look for are this graphic here where you've got one lightning hitting the boss and one lightning hitting me. Then you can drop your Vile lightning strikes, do whatever you want to do. And then the boss will go down. But as long as you're getting those 2 lightning strikes turn up, that means that you're double hitting. So we'll go into POB to go through the skill gems, the items, and the tree. This POB is half finished. I've put in my endgame in T16 gear sets, trees, and skills, but I haven't fleshed out the leveling part yet. It will be done before Lee start. So I have drop-down menus for each act, what items, what skills you need to equip, and there'll be detailed notes in the config here, just saying step by step what you need to do and what you need to aim for. I'm also going to bring out a separate video for leveling in case people prefer to learn that way. But for now, we'll just go through the skills that you're looking for when you've got your 6-link. So your 6-link setup wants to be Vile Lightning Strike, Multi-Strike, LE damage with attacks, Volatility, Added Lightning, and ideally Lightning Penetration. If you're struggling for mana, you can swap this for Inspiration. I went through the Corrupting Fever to proc Adrenaline. Basically, you have Second Wind, Life Tap, and Corruptive Fever in a 3-link. Second Wind and Life Tap can just stay at level 1. You don't need to level them. And then your Corrupting Fever gem, you just level up so that it takes just over half your life. So in this POB here, we have 3,500 life. So as long as your Corrupting Fever takes over half of that, that's going to proc your Adrenaline. You don't want it to go too much further than that because that means you're going to have less life when you come out of it. And remember, you do recover 25% of your life. So as soon as you proc Corrupting Fever, you get your 25% back. And then you can either just leech back, life flask, whatever you want to do. This is important because Adrenaline gives you defenses, speed, and damage. Along with that, we are running Smite, but as an aura. Smite gives you additional lightning damage as an aura, and we're scaling aura effect quite a lot. So we get more chance of shock and more added lightning damage from having this aura active. By linking it to more duration, and we also take a mastery on the tree, this should last around 8 to 10 seconds. You don't need to use it all the time, but if you can get used to doing it, it's definitely more damage. But this is really there instead of a curse on a boss. So instead of manually cursing a boss, you're hitting him with Smite once, getting your buff, and then you'll melt bosses before the buff runs out. We've also got a Blood Rage in here for attack speed and frenzy charges. For your movement speed, Leap Slam, faster attacks, level these up as much as you want, and then a Flame Dash just to get out of Grasping Vines. We have a Sniper's Mark linked to Mark on Hit and Life Tap. Again, the Life Tap doesn't need to be any higher than level 1. We have a level 4 casting damage taken with a level 11 Molten Shell. It's up to you the levels that you want to go with. Just remember that whatever the required level is for this gem, your skill gem can't be any higher than that. So level 4 casting damage taken is level 44, Molten Shell 44 as well, so this will trigger. And then we're running 4 auras. We've got a Wrath, Determination, and a Precision, and a Grace. So one thing to make sure you do not do is do not link any of your auras up to your Corrupting Fever setup or your Sniper's Mark setup, or you're not going to have any life. You're not going to be able to reserve the skills. So it's easier if you make sure your Wrath, Precision, Grace, and Determination are just in unlinked sockets. I've put here what items I had them in, but it really doesn't matter. Nothing has to go in specific sockets other than obviously your 6-link. And that's the skill gem setup. When you get higher up, it really doesn't change. If you wanted to go like a full-on expensive version, you can obviously start getting awakened gems in, push your gems up to 21, but the actual gem setup doesn't change. In terms of the tree, this is a tree that I recommend you aim for when you like farming T16 maps. I won't go through it in too much detail. It's just a few important things to note. It is precise technique, so you have to make sure your accuracy is above your life. Using point blank to do more projectile damage to close enemies. And we are taking lots of reservation efficiency so that we can fit in the 350% auras and precision and have enough mana to use our skills. So we take the mana here with the reservation mastery. We take the reservation efficiency wheel here, along with increased effect. And then we take the wheel here with increased duration of non-curse auras, because this increases your Smite aura. Without this, it's about 6 seconds, and that just doesn't feel long enough. You do need to get fires an additional projectile, and you need strikes 1 additional enemy. All your gear, as we'll go through, should be armor and evasion. So you can take this mastery to get 15% more suppression. And then we're going to take this suppression wheel and the lucky. So when you flask up, you've got 98% chance to suppress spell damage. There's not really much else to go through in terms of the tree. Frenzy charge on bosses come from this mastery here. Other than that, it's a fairly standard tree. I'll leave you to look through it in your own time. The only other thing to note is this mastery is big damage. Hits have a 25% chance to treat resistances as inverted. Essentially, that just means every 4th hit, on average, the resistances will reverse. So if it's a boss and they've got 50 resistances, every 4th hit, they're going to have minus 50%. This is a really good way to start getting bigger shocks on enemies, because we get shocks from 20% chance here, and then our smite will give us about 30%. So every 2 hits on average are going to shock. If one of them is this inverted one, you'll just see your shock jump up quite a bit, which is really nice. And then just leech and instant leech. This will be enough to sustain your mana. The only thing to note about this build is it doesn't have any life recovery. All of the sustain will either come from a life flask, which you shouldn't have to use very often, or leech. Because we hit so many times with this skill. So if we go to our lightning strike setup, you can see the attack rate is 8.59, but it also fires projectiles as well. So you're going to be hitting 10 to 20 times on an enemy. So things like instant leech are going to be really, really massive for getting sustain. You need to take pierce as well, because otherwise you won't clear very well, because your lightning strike projectiles will just disappear when you hit the first target. So you want both of these for +3 pierce. And then this mastery here you will use if you notice your accuracy isn't above your life. In terms of items, I'm just going to go through the setup that you kind of want to aim for your like Atlas clear setup. You don't need this stuff to get to T16 maps. Once you get there, farm a bit of currency in this setup will easily see you getting your first 2 void stones, and then it won't take much more investment to get your 3rd and your 4th. So this build is basically a mini aura stacker, which is the reason we go in Ichimonjis. On paper, they look terrible, but they give big attack speed. They have fairly decent fizz damage, but they give us 10% increase of buffs and 10% reservation efficiency of skills. And it's running these 2 items that allows me to run 3 auras. The reason I wanted to run 3 auras is because we're running Perseverance, which gives you increased attack damage per your lowest of armor and evasion. And I have to run Wrath because that's where most of our damage comes from. So I needed to fit Wrath, Precision, Determination, and Grace into the build. And with these 2 swords and the nodes on the tree, I'm able to do that. So you see with Flask up, it's not spectacular because they have been nerfed, but this is based on current armor and evasion values and life values. So these might be significantly higher, but it's a decent increase to damage. The only thing I'd recommend getting on your helmet as soon as you can is reduce mana cost of attacks, which is an Exarch implicit. The Exarch lesser embers are normally really cheap because everyone farms Exarch maps at lead start. You don't need to worry about an Eater implicit at this stage. Most of the gear I've just assumed you're not going to get any implicits on. I just think the helmet one's really important with the increase in mana cost. So I've just gone life, resistances, 6 link. The gloves are attack speed, resistances, and life. Ignore the lightning damage to attacks. I just didn't want to leave all the items with 4 mods on them. It does very, very little. Attack speed, most important thing, along with life and obviously some resistances. Your boots, again, life, movement speed, resistances. The amulet, you want to get some attributes, if you can, LE damage with attacks, and obviously some life. Anoint Divine Judgment is really, really cheap, and it gives 50% increased LE damage. It's this node over here. So it's only a black, teal, and sepia oil. For the rings, I've just put the same ring on twice. It's basically mediocre intelligence, mediocre life, mediocre all res, and non-challenge skills crafted on. And then the other is exactly the same. Got your Perseverance unique belt. Flasks are going to be Quicksilver with attack speed, Quartz with chance to avoid being stunned, Jade with evasion, and Granite with armor. And I recommend getting an Inertia Jewel into the build because it gives you, as you can see here, 82 strength. On this build, you need 155 intelligence and 155 strength, which is very difficult to do with the tree that we take. So this is just a very nice way to get some strength. Later on, you can always put a Lethal Pride in here to get some damage and strength. If you wanted to get slightly better gear, things like increased LE damage with attacks, flat damage, and attack speed are the way to go. But honestly, you don't really need to worry about this. Gear is ample. Where your damage is going to come from is getting your gems to 20, then getting them to 20% quality. Because we're stacking a lot of aura effect, then getting a wrath from 19 to 20 makes a big difference. Same with your smite gem. Like I said, I've put some more gear sets in here. This is now the new update, so it's got all the correct gem levels and everything else. So we'll go into the config. It looks like you can set up config sets, but I can't seem to get them to work. Every time I change one, it just changes all of them. But basically, the configuration doesn't really change, other than we are going to fit a taming in later on in the expensive gear set, which is why I've got ignited and chilled ticked, because we're going to add some damage to get ignite and chill just to make the most of the ring, because it's really overpowered, but it's probably going to be expensive this league. So 15 shock is very conservative. You will get 15 shock on the basic version. If you went up to the expensive one, you should be hitting well over 30% shock. We've got frenzy charges ticked because we have a mastery. We'll have adrenaline, and the other two things come from the ascendancy. 10 projectile damage because of point blank, and that's it. So I'll just go through the gear sets and the trees just so you can see what sort of damage you can expect. So we'll set all the skills correctly and all the items. Wrong one. There we go. So this is your kind of beginner setup. This shouldn't cost very much at all to get this going. The unique should all be cheap. If perseverance is really expensive, which I don't think it will be, it's pretty common, just put on a prism weave. That does really good damage, and in a mapping environment it's about the same. Because you're going to be relying on onslaught and kill, you will lose your onslaught on the bosses and the damage that you get from your armor and evasion. But it's a decent belt to put on while you wait for this to come down in price, which it will do. So for your first two void stones, I'm just going to take the flask off to make it fair. Just make sure the setup is all okay. And then we'll just take the Vile Lightning Strike off for a minute. So when you don't have your Vile Lightning Strike up and you don't have flask up, you're still doing a decent 2.5 million damage. Then when you get opportunity to burst damage and your Vile skills come up, you can use your Vile, you can put all your flasks on, and then you're doing 4.2 million. So for the intro pinnacle bosses, it's plenty. This will be your DPS on map bosses because you'll have your flasks up and you will have your Vile charges ready. So the map bosses are going to go down in seconds. It's going to feel really, really smooth. This probably, in all honesty, is going to get you the third and fourth void stones if you're half decent at doing Uber, Elder, and Maven. If you're a little bit uncomfortable with it, you can spend some more money. So what I've got here is a setup for if you're a bit uncomfortable doing bosses on budget gear. We've put some more items into the build. So essentially what we've done here on the skills is we've added 20/20 quality all the way around. Nothing else, no awakened gems or anything. In the items, I've just put some implicits on the gear. It's all going to be with the lesser embers and icons, and then I've added in the taming ring. Taming ring gives massive damage. Because we scale a lot of our damage quite easily, I don't think we're going to need much cold damage and fire damage to chill and ignite. So you basically just get some fire damage on an amulet, some cold damage on a ring, and it should be enough to apply like a minimum chill and a minimum ignite, and that will trigger big damage through the taming ring, because that now gives you 35% increased damage per type of ailment. So that's why I have ignite and chill ticked, because when you hit your taming, you're going to get bigger damage. So as you can see here, if we again take the flasks off, and then we go into the bigger budget and we take off the Vile skill, you're looking at 4.1 million damage without anything up. You then put your Vile skill on, activate your flasks, and you're looking at about 7 million burst DPS. So that's going to comfortably deal with Uber, Elder, and Maven. And then this setup is kind of going to do the majority of what you want to do in T16s at a league start. I've also set up an expensive version. This will add awakened gems in. They're not particularly expensive other than awakened daily damage with attacks. That's really expensive. I've just put it in there to show you what can be done. But I think awakened added lightning and awakened lightning pen are not normally too bad. And then everything else again is just quality gems. We've pushed the smite up to 21 for a better buff. But most of the money is going to go on your awakened gems, a voice of the storm amulet, and then a lethal pride with 2 lots of double damage. So it's probably going to be looking at like 20 divines for this. But it's going to do pretty much anything you want to do for the most part. We've still got pretty respectable defenses. Got a ton of burst damage when the flasks and the Vile skills are up. Even when they're not, you're probably looking at about 7 million. Let's just have a look actually to test. Yeah, so you're looking at 8.7 million if you get your double hit in without anything up. And then obviously when you get to a boss, a lot more damage. So for things like T17s and that, this should be fine because they've been made quite a bit easier. I wouldn't go in and try and do Uber bosses and stuff like that, but that's kind of the progression if you wanted to push it further. Me personally, I'm probably going to take it up to this kind of bigger budget version, and then I'm going to look to switch to Slayer. I just don't know how to build that yet. I've worked full time. I've really not had time to look into it, which is the reason I'm league starting champ, because I know this works out the box. It's also really, really smooth progression through the map tiers, because once you get your Ichimonjis and a 5-link, you can pretty much go straight to red maps. As I say, there'll be fleshed out leveling POBs in here. I just need the time to do them, but that's kind of it with all that. So let's move on to the next part of the video. I realise I forgot to cover off Ascendancies, so we'll do that now. Your first Labyrinth, 100%, first to try, last to fall is the node to take. You get your Corrupting Fever set up, then you're permanently intimidating enemies that are on full life, which means they take more damage, and we get that adrenaline buff, which gives us, speed, damage, defenses, everything. It feels amazing in the campaign. Second and third is totally up to you. We're going to take the Fortification and also Inspirational. Inspirational will give you more damage, because at this stage in the campaign, you're going to be running damage auras. If you feel like you want the defenses first, go Fortitude, then Inspirational. Then for your Uberlab, you're going to take Conqueror. This isn't the best node in the world, but with the nerfed champion, this is the 4th best one in my opinion. Essentially, you taunt on hit. What this means is that if you taunted an enemy recently, which is 4 seconds, you take 10% reduced damage. So it is a nice little extra defensive layer. So let's very quickly talk about Pantheons and Bandits before we close the video out. For Pantheons, until you get Ailment Immune, Soul of the Brine King is definitely the way to go. Firstly, cannot be stunned if you've been stunned in the last 2 seconds, which now we don't get stun immunity can be helpful. 100% chance of avoid being frozen, pretty mandatory, and 50% reduced effective chill, all really, really nice. At some point, you're going to be able to get Ailment Immune on the build if you want to spend a bit more currency. Then you'd swap to Lunaris, because it just gives really, really good buffs. It gives you fizz damage reduction when you map in. It gives you increased movement speed, chance to avoid projectiles, and reduced any damage taken. So this is easily, for me, the best major god for mapping. But if you don't have freeze immunity, you're going to have to go with Soul of the Brine King. For your minor, I like to run Unaffected by Burning Ground, mainly because this build has very little to no life recovery. All of our sustain comes from Leech, which means Burning Ground can hurt quite a lot, especially because we're going to be running Blood Rage. If you're not too worried about Burning Ground, this is the next best one to take. It gives you 60% reduced effective shock, but more importantly, you can't be blinded. Blind is a bit of a painful mechanic when you're running a build that relies on your accuracy being above your life, because if you get a map, let's say you get a corrupted red map where there's blind on hit, as soon as they blind you, you might drop below your life for accuracy, then you're missing out on 40% more damage. That feels pretty bad. So definitely get this one fully unlocked. Definitely this one fully unlocked. And they're the two I kind of switch between when I'm mapping. When you're bossing, you just want to put the best one on that suits the scenario. So you could put this one on for 6% reduced fizz reduction if it's just one boss. And then you could look at something like Gruthkul. So enemies that have hit you with an attack have 8% reduced attack speed. That's really nice as well. You've really got to play it to your own situation in terms of the minor. But like I say, for major, until you get Ailment Immune capped, definitely Soul of the Brine King, then Soul of Lunaris. So let's quickly talk about bandits. So in 3.25, they've reworked the bandit rewards. You can either get 1 passive point, you can get 15% elemental resistances, you get 8% movement speed, and then I think there's one that gives you 40 life. For me, personally, I'm going to go with elemental resistances. If you want to level quicker, by all means take 8% movement speed. The reason I'm taking the 15% res is it's going to make my gearing cheaper when I get to maps. Having what is 45% resistances is actually massive, and it might mean that instead of needing to buy a ring for 10C to cap my resistances, I can buy one for 1C. You can respec this later on. It does cost 20 Orbs of Regret, but if you've got all your resistances in order, I would then go and swap to 8% movement speed. Anywhere you can pick up movement speed for cheap is definitely a bargain. You also have the option later on of just taking the extra skill point. If, the extra skill point would get you to a dual socket, or it'll help you out while you're leveling through the next level that you're on, then you could go and do that. But for me personally, it's going to be elemental resistances, and then once I no longer need that, I will switch to movement speed. That's kind of it for the video. I'll just leave with the summary of things you need to remember when you're playing the build. Firstly, it is a precise technique build. You need to make sure your accuracy is always, always, always above your life. This mastery here can help out if you do start to fall behind. As mentioned, the build relies on Adrenaline and Smite. If you need big damage, use Smite. Adrenaline you should be keeping up all of the time anyway. These two things add an absolute ton of damage. The build doesn't work without them. So it is a bit more button pressing than some builds, but it's not too much to ask for an absolute ton of increase in speed, damage, and defenses. Don't forget, Lightning Strike double hits when you have +1 additional strike. That again is actually more than double DPS because our projectiles do more than melee. So ensure on bosses you're always positioning correctly. And last thing I'd say is don't feel like you have to rush. The league mechanic looks like fun. Feel free to get involved early on. None of the gear that we've got is really going to go up in price. Most of it's going to go down. So don't feel bad if you spend a bit more time in the campaign, or you want to check out the lead mechanic, or you want to do some heisting early on. There's plenty of options. I hope I've covered everything off. If not, I will leave notes in the video description. Thank you very much for watching. Hope everyone has a fun 325, and I'll catch you next time.